risk of cliche, we're here having an interesting conversation at what I think is a unique moment in time, a moment of both crisis and opportunity for those of us who care about criminal justice reform in this country. The crisis is, from my perspective, a potential crisis of legitimacy. I don't need to tell anyone in this room that there's lots of places with exceedingly, distressingly low levels of public trust and justice around this country. There are populations that believe that the justice system not only doesn't serve them, but is actually actively out to get them. That is a problem, and not just a small problem. George Washington once said that the true administration of justice is the firmest pillar of good government. Anyone who cares about our country, the state of our society, needs to care about the administration of justice in this country. And at the same time that there's a moment of crisis, I think that there's also a window of opportunity. We're seeing just a plethora of exciting new initiatives open up around the country that are really trying to reach out to community in progressive and proactive ways, and trying to move beyond the kind of traditional response to crime of, arrest, prosecution, adjudication, incarceration, and move towards prevention and placemaking and peacemaking, at the risk of being alliterative. And so what we want to do today with this panel is to break it all down, the good, the bad, and the in-between. And our goals really are to kind of really set up Judge Pratt's panel and presentation and session in a way. We want to look at what is effective community engagement and community partnership, and we want to look at what are some of the challenges that effective community engagement confronts, and I think that will lead us nicely into the how, which I think is what Judge Pratt is going to focus on. So to guide us today, we have a badass panel. Am I allowed to say badass, Julius? So I won't read their whole bios because you have them in your materials. But we have with us the great Dawn Diener, who is the elected public defender in Nashville for a decade, is about to step down. We can maybe ask her a little bit about that. We have the wonderful, the path-breaking Alex Calabrese, maybe the Dean of Community Justice, who's been the presiding judge at the Red Hook Community Justice Center since it opened in 2000. We have Sheriff Jerry Clayton on his third term, is that correct, sir? As elected sheriff in Washtenaw County, Michigan, which includes Ann Arbor. And then we have another pathbreaker. We have DA Paul Howard, first African-American elected DA in Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, and one of the leading innovators in the field of community prosecution. So we have with us law enforcement, prosecution, defense bar, and courts represented. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pepper our panel with a series of questions and have them respond, and then I'll leave a little time at the end for questions from the audience. All right? You with us? Okay. I want to start by asking you all to address one question to start, and I don't want a speech, but a couple minutes, and respond to this prompt, which is, what does, from the perspective, the context of your agency, what does community partnership mean to you? What does it look like when it is done well? I want to start with you, DA Howard.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
It doesn't seem like you want to share mine.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? First of all, I want to tell you that I'm here. I have just finished a trial that we've been preparing for 4.5 months. So I've been working weekends and late at night. So if I'm acting kind of strange, don't attribute it to using weed. It's probably because of the case. I also want to tell you, I'm from Georgia. And when I told people that I was coming to Alabama, they were very upset. We're still trying to get over our loss to the little school here, but I'm here anyway. The reason that I thought that it was important to be here today, first of all, is because Julius asked that I be here. And let me tell you, Julius is a big man in criminal justice for this whole country, whether people know it or not. But I also want to let you know that this community partnership, it is important and that really can work. I started with this whole idea of trying to put together a community court by visiting the Red Hook Project many, many years ago. Tried to actually put together a building just like the Red Hook building, and the deal fell through. But about 6 years ago, a community actually came to the DA's office, a business community in a particular section of our county. And what they explained to me is that they had a problem. The problem was that the area that they were located in, the businesses were moving away because drug dealers and prostitutes had invaded the area. Well, of course, the first thing that I asked was, well, what were the police doing? And the business folks pointed out that the police had been very active. So, Judge, what we did is we actually went back to see how many arrests had the police made in the last 5-year period. As it turned out, the policemen had made about 6,500 arrests, and the area continued to get worse. So we kind of figured out that something was missing. So we went into this with the issue, with the desire to solve that problem. And what we decided to do was to put together a community court. So we actually moved a court to the very area that was in consideration, and we involved the business community and the people who lived in the surrounding area to become a part of the problem-solving equation. So rather than simply taking the defendant, the prosecutors making a plea recommendation, and the public defenders fighting about it, what we decided to do is to actually sit down with the parties that I've mentioned, with the community being prominent, and make a recommendation regarding how we could get this person to stop committing crimes in this area. And this area is called Fulton Industrial Boulevard, so that they would not come back to the area. To make a long story short, what we were able to do was to drop the drug arrest in that area about 71%. We dropped the prostitution rate about 60%. We increased the number we dropped the number of vacancies, the leases to other businesses, by about 30%. But most importantly, we reinstituted or increased the tax digest in that area for several $1 million. The other thing that we did, because of this partnership, now the people in our community are now fighting, the city of Atlanta and Fulton County are fighting to take over Fulton Industrial Boulevard. And Julius, if you talk to some of the other elected officials, they will probably point out that that is because of other factors. But this is my theory. I don't think there's anybody here from that group, so we're taking full credit for what was done. So I just want to say that I cannot overemphasize to you the importance of that connection with the community, the business community, and the regular citizen community as well.
Sheriff Clayton.
Good morning. So I was talking to a young lady in the back, and we were introducing ourselves, and I said, yep, I'm from Michigan, Ann Arbor. I said, but I was born in Bessemer, Alabama. So I'm sort of coming home. She says, well, yeah, anybody of note comes from Alabama or wants to be from Alabama. So I am happy to be here. So I'll try to be brief and frame the response to this community engagement. So in the sheriff's office, I won't bore you with the history, But for us, community engagement came from our vision of what is possible before I got elected. I'd spent 20 years there, retired, went off and did some consulting. But when I was asked to run, the sheriff's office had a bad brand, bad reputation, disconnected from the community. And we took some time to think about what is really possible if a sheriff's office understood the leadership position that they were in, and they operated from this perspective, what we call mission drives strategy, drives structure. And the mission being attached to what we call ultimate outcomes. So if you do it right, what will it look like? So we started from that perspective. Part of doing it right was partnership with the community. So in the sheriff's office, community engagement is part of our operational philosophy for the delivery of police services. So it's not a program. So it's not these officers, the deputies do community engagement, these deputies do real police work. No. The real police work community engagement is part of real police work. We also understand that it's a process, not an event. So I've known many agencies that do a cookout or a barbecue or do this, and they understand, they can't understand why haven't they formed the right relationship with the community. No, it's got to be in your DNA for an organization. Everybody's got to be a part of it, and you have to engage and get into the weeds with the community. Not just from a preaching and an educating them perspective, but from a learning from them perspective. So there are a couple pieces to that. Both groups have to be vulnerable. So you have to be able to say, we don't know everything. So we're the experts in delivery of police services, but we're not the experts in what makes your community great. We have to work together, and vice versa. Community has to open themselves up to that police services organization. So to be vulnerable also aligns you up to be trusting, to work with each other in partnership toward a common outcome. We also believe that you have to seek each other out, not avoid each other. So I spent 10 years on our SWAT team, kicking doors, doing all this stuff, and during those days, it resonated with me. The only time the kids saw the police is when we were taking somebody to jail. That's a problem. And every other time we avoided them, they avoided us. So part of community engagement is seeking each other out, embracing uncomfortable interactions, working toward a common goal. A couple more things real quick. Asking, not accusing. Inclusion, not exclusion. Proactive versus reactive. And everybody's like, oh, these sound like great buzzwords. What do they look like? I won't spend a lot. Maybe we'll get to some of how you actually execute. But quite frankly, it comes from the organizational culture. What are our basic assumptions about what is possible if we partner with the community? Start from there. And it has to permeate the entire organization. Everyone in the organization must start from the basic assumption that if we work together, we can produce outstanding, incredible outcomes for the communities that we work with. And then you have to roll up your sleeves and get to work.
Judge.
Thank you and good morning. I want to talk about two places. The first one is Red Hook, and it's the year 2000. We're about to open. Greg Berman in his jeans or dungarees or whatever you call them was out working with the Red Hook community, setting up exactly what the community was promised. So we're about to open, and I go to a community meeting because I'm as cynical about government as anybody else. And I said, we're not bringing a local jail. We're bringing to you what you were promised. It's a one-judge court, and I'm lucky to be the one judge that's going to be presiding in that court. A woman comes up to me after the meeting, and she says, are you really a judge? Now, let me know. Yeah, I had a suit on. Come on, I had a shirt. So I looked at her, and I said, yes, and why do you ask? And she said, we never had a judge out here. And I have to tell you, that really hit me. And it stayed with me. And it stayed with me because years before, they saw their school principal gunned down right before Christmas by two drug gangs caught in a crossfire. New York Times the next day said, that's not an isolated incident. That was murder number 21. Up to that point, there had been over 500 robberies, over 350 assaults, 10 rapes in this very small community. And I said, they never had a judge out here. And I saw that as a real court-community disconnect, which is still happening, as you know, in a lot of jurisdictions. And the second place I want to talk about is here. I spent the weekend here, and I'm still trying to process what I saw at the Civil Rights Institute, which is an amazing place. And what I saw, I'm trying to figure out the role of the court system was isolated, and it served one part of the community and helped one part of the community oppress the other part of the community. And it really was used as a rubber stamp for some horrific and shocking police conduct in the first part of Birmingham Tale of Two Cities. And it really served, the court system was a tool of oppression and division. And I compared it, I'm thinking about community courts and engaging the community, the value of engaging the community. We're out in the community. We're not isolated from community. We are out in our community. We treat people with dignity and respect, all people. We see everyone as part of the community. We're trying not to incarcerate people, but trying to reach out a hand and work with them to help them. And we're setting an example. And by doing that, we're building trust. We're bringing people together, court, community, and police. And the community courts then are a source of healing and inclusion. We're not a source of division, and we're not a source of oppression. And that's the role to me, and that's the importance of community courts. And it's the importance of holding this conference here, it seems to me, because we've got a tale of two cities, and that second city is the Birmingham Municipal Court. And I think today, just like Judge Sparks said, they are doing today, we are all healing our communities and out in our communities and building trust. And that's our job. Thank you.
Dawn?
I don't know what exactly I could add to all of those descriptions of what community engagement is about. I mean, I think all of you in your own way have run the gamut of exactly how I would answer it. I will, however, take advantage of being a public defender up on this dais, because it's rare, in my experience, that public defenders get invited to conversations about community courts and public safety. The voice of public defense really is not heard very often in convenings like this, and certainly not in discussions about public safety. But I think public defenders have an important role to play in public safety, and we also have an important role in generating community engagement in the criminal justice system. Like sheriff's offices, public defenders have a branding problem, but it's a branding problem that I would say we created ourselves, and we're complicit in creating, right? Public defenders, since they were created, or the concept of them were created out of the 1963 decision in Gideon versus Wainwright, we were never designed to function well, right? We were never intended to do a good job. We were never funded and resourced in a way to ensure that poor people charged with crimes would get representation equal to that which somebody with money could afford to purchase. And so we were set up in some ways to fail. And as time has progressed, we have become, in many ways, complicit in the injustice that happens to our clients. In Nashville, the only city I've ever been a public defender in, our philosophy was we help everybody who needs help. And when we do that, we become like Lucy and Ethel on that conveyor belt at the chocolate factory, right? And many of you have seen that skit, that show, right? And it is an example, it's an analogy that I often use when I talk to people about what happened in public defense as mass incarceration began, as tough on crime policies took hold, and public defenders were on that conveyor belt. And we never told the boss, we never said, this is going too fast. We never said, stop the conveyor belt. And we never refused to continue working. Instead, we just kept on taking and kept on taking. And that was hard on us. But the real casualties of that were our clients and the people that we serve. And so today, our communities don't trust us. We are called public pretenders, and we know that. And so to me, community engagement is all of the things that these gentlemen have spoken about. But it is my vision for what that looks like is a public defender's office that is valued in the community where it exists. A public defender's office where the staff is known by the community that needs that office, but also known by the community that never needs that office and valued by both. It's a public defender's office where when somebody is arrested, the community trusts they can call us, they know who to call, they know who we are, and they believe and have trust that we will provide the same representation for their loved one that if they had money, they could purchase. And so that's really far away from where we actually are, though. But that's my ideal.
It's good to have ideals. So Sheriff Clayton, I want to turn back to you and the challenge of how. I noticed in your mission statement that you have hardwired a desire to create strong and sustainable communities into the mission statement of your office, which I found quite powerful. So interested to hear you talk about how you're really hardwiring a focus on community into the DNA of your office. And also, I believe you have a unionized workforce.
Yes.
I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit about how that cuts for you and whether that presents unique challenges or opportunities as well.
Sure. So first with the how do we wire it in, I'll go back to what I said earlier. So we're really cognizant of our organizational culture. So we know a couple things, that you can't legislate behavior through policy, or just because the boss says you're going to do something. We might get compliance. What we're looking for from our staff is commitment to a certain set of ideals, right? And you only get commitment when you have rolled out a vision that resonates with people's heads and their hearts. So you can't say it one time. You can't have fancy models. We have spent time, now I'm in my 10th year, and probably after 8, we finally felt that we had reached in our culture where we have gotten, if anybody's been familiar with Rogers' innovation curve, where we've gotten to the late majority. Those folks in an organization that are hesitant and reluctant to move to the new direction that leadership lays out. We believe we have 75% of our organization that clearly understands that part of our role is to contribute to the building of a strong and sustainable community. That's the last part of our mission statement. The other thing is we talk about what our role is in the sheriff's office in helping build a strong and sustainable community. So we talk about what our tools are, what the arrows in our quiver. It's not just law enforcement. So our division that provides the police services is not called law enforcement, it's called police services. And we've defined what that means. And the important word on the back is services. We deliver a service. Everyone we come in contact with, even if we put handcuffs on them, they are a customer that's receiving a service. We should treat them with dignity and respect. We should honor who they are, all of those things. And it is throughout our entire organization. We talk about it all the time. It's a significant investment. And oh yeah, by the way, we have sat down and worked with the community to identify if we do it right and they do it right, what are these ultimate outcomes? What would it look like in Washington County? And it wasn't just me and my team having those discussions. Frontline deputies, frontline correction officers, dispatchers in the room having those conversations. So it's not just us having a conversation with the community and telling our staff about it. It's all of us getting down, taking some of the slings and arrows of institutional history that gets in the way, trying to move us toward what are the right solutions. The last piece in terms, and that was just the Cliff Notes version of it, it's taking some time. And we know we have some folks who we call the laggards that aren't coming. So let me just say this, there's something for them too. They don't get to choose to not move in the direction that we say we're moving because they don't want to. You work for the sheriff's office. This is our direction. If you choose to move in a different direction, then we will address that appropriately. But when my staff asked me, will you back us when we do things, I said, sure, as long as you're moving in the direction that we have agreed we're going to move forward. And I think that's critical, that the leadership commits to something and it's not flavor of the month. As far as the union is concerned, yes, we have a union, we respect our union, we have a good working relationship. They don't run our sheriff's office. There's a role for them. They contribute to the greater good of the sheriff's office, but make no mistake, they don't set policy, they don't set direction, and they don't work to create a counterculture to where we're going. So we believe that if we, and I'll add this last piece, here's why I think we've had some success. It's continuity of leadership. If the leader is changing every 2 to 3 years, you can't have continuity of direction and vision and all those things. You just start over. So we have been blessed to be here for 10 years, and in that 10 years, we think we've moved the organization to a point where community engagement is just in our DNA.
So speaking of continuity, D.A. Howard, you have served 6 terms, am I right? And were, as I said before, an early adopter of the community prosecution model, and have opened up 9 community prosecution offices. I'm kind of interested to hear you talk about how you think about those 9 offices, how much uniformity you push down to those offices, and how much you allow each of them to look different and unique from each other, and allow prosecutors on the ground to kind of embroider the idea.
Well, I believe that it's important if you are going to tell the community that you've changed the way that the district attorney operates, then there has to be something that people can see that signals the change. And one of the things that we incorporated was the use of community prosecutors. We started with one community prosecutor, and now we've got 9 community prosecutors. The city of Atlanta is divided into 6 zones, so we've got one community prosecutor assigned to each one of the zones. We've got a North Fulton community. North Fulton County is the wealthiest part of our county. And then there's a South Fulton County prosecutor. And we also maintain a court watch officer. And we have recently added another factor, and that is a gang coordinator's office that works within our community prosecutors. And what we've tried to do is to go to the communities and not just kind of hold meetings and hold press conferences, but what we tried to do is to institute permanent change in the communities as much as we could. So what does that mean? One of the communities that we have recently moved our community prosecutor's office, we had one there before, but the landlord, a nightclub, moved next door to the community prosecutor's office. And so the landlord had to decide whether or not to keep our office or to keep the nightclub, and I'm being polite when I call it a nightclub, because the nightclubbers did not appreciate being in an office next door to the community prosecutors. The landlord decided to ask us to move. So we moved to a different office, but it was really a blessing in disguise, because on the day that we moved, the day before that we moved, the gang members decided to show us that they did not want us in the neighborhood. So they actually came and shot someone about 3 doors down from the neighborhood. So Judge, what I said is, well, we probably won't have anyone to show up at our grand opening, but we had more than 500 people from the community that showed up, and they said that we wanted the community prosecutor's office. So one of the things that we did was to talk about a bicycle unit. And so when we talked about the bicycle unit, of course, one of the first things the policeman said is, we don't have the money to buy the bicycles. So what the community prosecutors did is to raise the money to buy the bicycles, purchase the bicycles, and as a result, during the first 2 months of operation, the crime rate dropped by 18%. So, that is something real for the community. Not only was it real for the community, some of the policemen who actually disliked the DA's office said, I am so glad that you guys are in this neighborhood now, because we can really see a change. So what I believe is as prosecutors and law enforcement officers, that we have to establish institutions in our community to actually show people that we are creating a change. And once they see those institutions, and once they see the change, then I believe that the citizens begin to understand that you are in fact different, and not just saying that you're different.
Dawn, so I admire your openness to self-analysis, which I feel like is, in a lot of places the defense bar has kind of gotten a free ride, actually, amidst a lot of public criticism that's happened within the justice system and of different actors within the criminal justice system. And I'm curious, one of the things that you've created, you've done a listening tour of Nashville. I'm kind of curious to hear what that looks like. And did you hear anything that surprised you as you went around Nashville?
Well, to answer that last question, not really.
Oh.
No. We didn't hear it. I didn't hear anything too surprising. So the listening tours were part of a 5-part initiative that we started at the office called Defend Nashville. And the reason for that initiative was that we had very recently tackled what I consider to be the biggest problem for our office, which was our excessive workloads. And we did that by, for the first time ever, advising our local courts that we were going to start workload conflicting off cases. We were no longer going to sustain a culture that said, we help everybody. And instead, we were going to say, we have to limit how many clients we will take each day, so that we can try to get to that place of equilibrium where our resources can properly, we have appropriate resources to provide high quality representation to every client we represent. And so we took on that initiative, made that decision and started turning down cases, and we anticipated some backlash. And I was concerned about that, number one. And number two, I was concerned that pretty much nobody in the Nashville community understood anything about what was really going on in the courthouse, except perhaps those folks who were being churned through it. And they were in not really in positions of power very often to do anything about it. And so Defend Nashville included a speaking tour to do community education with individuals who never really go to the courthouse and see what's there. It included the listening tour, which was about our own self-analysis. It was about, we believe the community needs to be educated, but we also believe we need to be educated about what our clients, their families, and those who live in those communities where our clients come from, how they experience the criminal justice system, how they experience our office's service to them, and where are our problems. And so the listening tour was about that, and it was really, really hard to get anybody to come out and talk to us, right? I think that was the biggest thing that I learned. There was a local public housing site where there had been a lot of police-citizen violence. And many of our clients come from that residential location. And so we wanted to go there first. We wanted to go and talk with community residents and hear what they had to say. And we spent about 2 weeks going door to door with flyers, trying to drum up engagement, trying to educate residents that we were going to be there, why we were coming there, why we wanted to talk with them. And when the night came, I think we had about 15 or 20 members of our staff there. We have about 80 people on staff. And I think we had more staff there than community members who came, right? After 2 weeks of going around trying to let people know we were coming. And to me, that is one of the things that I learned, which didn't surprise me. But there's so much cynicism and so much mistrust, even of a public defender's office, right? We're identified as part of the government. We're identified as part of that system that is steamrolling over people. The amount of concern that if residents were seen to come out to that event, that was going to be a problem in the community where they lived. And so the hardest thing, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is you cannot set up a listening tour, right? That's what I learned. What I learned is you can't throw your own event and think people are going to come to it. Instead, you need to go where people are, where they naturally convene. You need to be present in the community where the community naturally gathers. And so, that was like, oh, ha-ha moment for me. I probably should have known that. And so from there, I really learned a lot about where we needed to be and that we needed to be in places where our clients and their community leaders are. And frankly, in Nashville, that's in church on Sundays, a lot of the times.
So Sheriff Clayton, Dawn raises the specter of police-citizen violence. So we know that it's been said that all politics is local, but we also know that some stories are national, in fact. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is seemingly endless parade of videotaped acts of violence perpetrated against black men, largely by police. And I'm kind of be curious to hear you talk about how you protect the community engagement work that you've been doing from this larger national narrative that's going on out there. Or is it possible?
Yeah, I hope it is. So we believe that you have to write your own narrative, that organizationally you have to be thoughtful and deliberate in terms of communicating to the community, but also listening to the community too. So there are a couple recognitions that we have is that our relationship with the community is impacted by a number of things. And first thing is institutional history, right? So regardless of the person that's in the leadership position or the people in an organization, there's an institutional history that transcends the people themselves. So you must acknowledge that. When there's an incident that occurs, and so let me back up and say this too, we've invested in the community now for 10 straight years. It's a continual investment. And you know, trust is hard to gain, easy to lose. We're working every day to reinforce the trust. So when we make a mistake, we admit we made a mistake. If there is a question about an action, there's a process, but we've already explained the process. We do these things that are called community engagement sessions, where we take important issues that the community has told us is important, and we craft these educational sessions and we talk to the community about our process. So more than anything, you want to have alignment between the community's expectations about what you do and who you are with what the reality is. And you can't do it after an event has happened. If an incident happens in your community and this is the time you're trying to form a relationship, it's way too late. So we've been investing for 10 years. So when something happens in another part of the country, we get asked, we talk about it. We actually, in our organization now, when there's an incident that happens, especially around use of force, we get the video if it's available, and we do an internal debriefing of it. We break it down just like a football coach breaks down a game tape. And we talk about all the different tactics and try to learn from that. And by the way, we're willing to share that with the community. So we can talk these things through. So our default position in our organization is why wouldn't we give you that information? Why wouldn't we share the information? We believe in the absence of facts, myths emerge. So if we're not writing our narrative and communicating and engaging, somebody else will be, and that won't have good results. So I'll give you a critical one is around subject control, use of force. So we have just rewritten our subject control, use of force policy. And it is the result of a compilation of 4 different policies that have been worked on nationally, not just from a police perspective, but ACLU, Department of Justice. I do some consent decree work. So we spent first off a year analyzing all that. Oh yeah, what came from Perth and the Justice Department. We've analyzed it all. We broke it down. We put together what we believe is one of the most comprehensive subject control use of force policies. And by the way, it's not just the policy piece, it's the preamble at the beginning. That our job is to try to protect the emotional, psychological, and physical well-being of all participants. Not just the police officer, but everyone. And our mission is to try to protect the sanctity of all human life. So that's where it starts, and then we talk about that. And I was just having a conversation with my director of community engagement that now we're rolling that out to the community. We're going to share that policy, get feedback, and make tweaks. So yes, it's local, it can be influenced by the national, but you have to have an active, real relationship with the community so when something happens, they come to you, not to each other to try to get the answers.
Judge Calabrese, you talked about starting in Red Hook in 2000, and I was there, and I can tell you that Red Hook in 2000 is very different than what Red Hook looks like in 2018. Red Hook used to be a crack capital for not just New York City, but for the entire country. Doesn't feel that way so much anymore. I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit about how your relationship or the Justice Center's relationship with the Justice Center has had to grow and change and evolve over time as the neighborhood has changed.
Well, first of all, the most important part of Red Hook is the people living in public housing. They make up about 6,600 of the 11,500 people. And what I love about, one of the things I love about them is that they're not going anywhere, so you don't feel like you improve a neighborhood and all of a sudden, only wealthy people can move in, especially in New York. The second thing I love about them is they just constantly teach us about life on a daily basis because they live under difficult circumstances and yet they're just great people and they bring a lot of happiness and joy and upset. Because we also do housing court for public housing, and sometimes they're not real happy with New York City housing. which I understand, but we've actually been able to build a great relationship with them and a great relationship with NYCHA, and we're trying to work out things on a daily basis, which is always difficult. Red Hook has changed. What I really love about Red Hook is the work done by the Center for Court Innovation. We have just an excellent project director in Amanda Berman. What she's brought in is peacemaking, and what she's brought in is bridging the gap. It's very much the same thing, Sheriff, that you were talking about. It's where you get the police and community together. You don't want that only contact to be when they're putting handcuffs on someone you know. You want them to get to know the police. And so bridging the gap gives the officers and the community an opportunity to talk about things that they see on videos nationally. And, they'll ask the police, well, what do you think about when you see the shooting that just happened? Because unfortunately, they just keep coming. And so you do that, you have an honest discussion about that, then they have a team building, and then they went down to the African American Museum, which you have to get in DC, you have to get tickets for it, and it's a bus and it's expensive, so what did they do? They had to raise money, so how are they raising money? Police and community, and a lot of young people in the community doing a car wash. I mean, to me, that's just the coolest thing, right? I mean, that's just great. Police and community having fun, right? A lot of police cars came in, a lot of court cars came in, some community cars came in. But just the fact that they're doing that, building the relationship up so that if something bad happens, they can talk about it. The community say, well, okay, we're willing to listen. Let's hear what you have to say. And then, if it's really local, that's really the position they're going to take because you've built the relationship. You didn't start after the problem. So Red Hook continues to change, but we continue to develop programming. And one of the other things I did want to say is we're starting to see the fruits of being a beacon of education. I mean, the problem in public housing in particular is that your neighbor most of the time is not a teacher, firefighter, police officer, because they move out. You're on third generation of dropouts in a lot of public housing. So we had to show the value of education in our community through youth court pumping about 10 to 15 people a year from high school, making sure they graduate high school into community college and colleges, and we have a GED or high school equivalency classroom right on the second floor. And that's just fantastic. So I could see someone who does something, on a Monday at 11 o'clock in the morning. My first question is, how come you're not in school? You need to go upstairs and get that GED, and that GED pumped out about 15 a year. Well, now you're sending back role models back into your community. And they're starting to see, wait a second, this guy's going to college, this young woman's going to college. And we have people seeing college as a default now. And so when you work at it over all the years, it kind of accumulates. And that's probably one of the proudest thing I think of the work we've done in Red Hook. And that's getting people to see college as a default and use education.
Dawn, I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about how you balance, or maybe it's not a tension, but I could imagine there are moments of tension between the ethical obligation to zealously advocate on behalf of clients and the desire to bring community into the process of and engage them in the work of your office. Are those two impulses or mandates ever in conflict with each other?
I think that they can be. I think when a community experiences something difficult and tragic that leads to a loss of life, for instance, there's a need to show compassion and to show and to sort of be there for that community that is suffering. On the opposite side of that, oftentimes there is suffering within the same community for the person who has been accused or charged. And if we are in that role of representing that person, how do we remain loyal? How do we show loyalty and the ethical obligations that lawyers have to maintain loyalty to client if we are also speaking publicly, making a public statement, doing anything that shows empathy or sympathy for the members of the community who have been harmed and are feeling that harm? So that's a hard thing to do. I think that's all the more reason that our office needs to be actively engaged in educating community members about what our role is and why we do what we do and how we do what we do. And I do think that there are ways that we can find to try to express as an active service organization in the community our sympathy for segments of the community that are hurting, without compromising that loyalty to client. But it really is about communication and talking to people and saying, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, or this is what we're not doing, and this is why we're not doing that.
DA Howard, I wonder whether you've heard, as I've heard in the past, some people criticize community partnerships, community engagement, and say, that's just window dressing, or you're putting lipstick on a pig. Have you heard that kind of critique? And I'm wondering how you respond to it.
Well, it was very interesting listening to Sheriff Clayton, because when the whole question came up of police use of force, the natural inclination is to ask the police officers. But I don't believe that is exactly their main handlers of the problem. I believe that problem really should rest on the shoulders of prosecutors and district attorneys like myself. So what I see in my community is people who believe that we are being disingenuous because we're saying one thing, but when it moves to a police officer, we are doing something entirely different. So I have to give the police credit because they've been a lot more proactive than district attorneys. The national police organizations have made apologies to minority communities. The DAs haven't done anything of that sort. We are still operating as if what we're doing is right. And when you talk to people in the communities, what they are upset about, of course they're upset about some of the police activities, but I think what they're most upset about is that nothing ever happens, that no one is never prosecuted. And so it's difficult to go to a community and try to convince them that you are operating on a level of fairness and honesty when your office never prosecutes people who obviously did something wrong. Most of the policemen that I'm familiar with, they just don't sit up and say, hey, I sure hope one of my officers goes out and violates somebody's rights. But when that does happen, most of the responsible police chiefs would like for something to happen to that officer, because it at least says to the other officers that that's something that you cannot do. The police cannot do that alone. The person who's left with that responsibility is the district attorney's office. So in our creation or our work in the community courts, I would hope that a lot of the people here would go back and talk to their prosecutors and say, you're kind of putting me in a tough position if I'm out in the community and there's not a perceived follow-through from you as the prosecutor to apply the laws in a more even-handed way. Because I think that that's the only way that we can generate genuine community cooperation. If the community believes that you are going to work earnestly to apply the law, no matter who violates the law.
Sheriff Clayton, so in doing my research for this panel, I ran across a couple of interviews with you, and I recommend them highly. You should Google this man. He's a good interview. And in one of them, you say, if you're not a risk to the public, you shouldn't be in jail. And I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about how that message has resonated with the public in your county. And is there any kind of pushback from people that expect their chief law enforcement officer to be arguing for stiffer penalties?
So first, before I answer that, I want to applaud DA Howard. I really appreciate what you just said there. When we look at criminal justice reform, we must look at the entire continuum. And I think for too long, prosecutors and to some degree the courts have been let off the hook Police being that front line, most visible, they get most of the focus. It's the entire system. So from a community perspective, if the criminal justice system is not reflective of what the community wants, then take us all to task. Don't give any of us any leave. Hold us all accountable. To speak to your specific question, think about that. So it's great where I live. If you know Washington County, Ann Arbor is its own little sovereign nation. People talk about so many 26 square miles of fantasy surrounded by reality. There's some truth to that, but it is a great community. And it's a great community that values people. We are 720 square miles as a county, 360,000 people with just a 400-bed jail. And if I had my druthers, it'd be smaller, not bigger. Listen, the only people that need to be in jail are people that pose a significant public safety risk to individuals. Outside of that, why are we putting people in jail? So I can argue it along the entire continuum. I could argue it around the right thing to do. I could argue it around economics. It's $135 a day to keep someone in our jail. If you have someone whose crime has been fueled by a substance use disorder or a mental health disorder, they should not be in jail, they should be in treatment. If we've done the right assessment, that's been validated and is reliable, and we have identified that that person does not pose a risk, and oh yeah, we define risk by a person that poses a level of dangerousness to themselves and to others, then that person should be incarcerated. We can still manage them on tether, work release, any of those type of things, but still avail them the treatment that they need to address their root cause issue. That's how we start to move to building stronger, sustainable communities, not by just locking people away. Look, folks, we've tried that experiment. It does not work. This war on drugs, first off, if we say it's a war, then that means that there's collateral damage that is acceptable. The collateral damage that's been acceptable over the last 20 to 30 years have been people of color. That's no longer acceptable. And we need to push back on that. Washington County is 14% African American. I've been with the county for 30 years, have done the tracking. Consistently, 50% of the population are people of color. Not acceptable. So I don't have a problem saying that vocally in Washington County. We haven't gotten a lot of pushback. I've gotten a lot of silence. But not any open pushback, because I'm more than willing to have the debate publicly in our county. More than willing. So we're fortunate in the fact that there's no big, every time there's been this move to be a bigger jail, I haven't been a part of it, but it's been voted down. And there's been a greater focus on diversion, reentry, root cause, and somebody I think said, let's go to where people are, let's let them educate them about what makes their community better, and then let's pour the resources, not from a programmatic, but from a systematic standpoint, into what's going to impact people in their lives. So some of my colleagues don't agree, but they have not articulated it verbally, and I'm okay with that.
Did you notice that Jerry was looking over at me when he said some of my colleagues?
No, not at all.
Well, listen, and this is what I want to ask you to do, and I want to ask you, again, to hold the people in the criminal justice system and our political leaders accountable, because there's a real popular thing that people do, and like, for instance, in my county, they passed a resolution and said that no one should remain in jail who has been charged with possession of marijuana. And man, they celebrated it. And so they called me and asked me for a comment. Like, what do you think about that, Mr. Howard? And I said, guys, guess what? There is nobody in jail in our county who's been arrested for the possession of marijuana. There's nobody in jail. Let me tell you where the real issue lies in. It's when the crime elevates itself. Because people ask me all the time, well, what does the district attorney do? Let me tell you what the district attorney does every day. So about a month ago, police arrested these two young men from one of the best high schools in Atlanta, two young African Americans. They both played on the football team. Both had already received scholarships. And a couple of days before the end of school, one of them gets a gun. And they decide to drive to a mall, and there's this lady walking out of the mall. One of the guys jumps out of the car, puts the gun to her head, and robs her. The police are able to apprehend them because there's a video from the store, and within 45 minutes, they're in custody with the gun, with the property that they've removed from the lady. She's hysterical. So we get the case, and so the interview this woman, and what she says is, well, I'm not so sure that I want him to go to jail. The minimum punishment for armed robbery in the state of Georgia is 10 years to serve. So let me tell you something. If all I had to do was decide about marijuana smokers, I wouldn't even need to go into work. But what district attorneys and what we see is the people like those two young men. So what do you do with them? Those are the decisions that our criminal justice system has to make. Stupid crimes, neither one of those guys had ever been involved in a crime. Their parents came to my office. They were clearly working people. They didn't even know who the district attorney was. They'd never even heard of the district attorney. So I have to decide what to do with them. So this is what I decided to do. I decided to let both of them attend college. But during the summer, when they're out, they have to go and serve a term at the county jail. And so they get a chance to stay in college and get a degree and hopefully grow up to be productive citizens. I don't know how many people would have made that decision, but my point is that there is this question that we're talking about, at least in urban communities, is a lot more serious than just people smoking marijuana. Because let me tell you, in my county, I firmly believe smoking marijuana is probably, people think it's legal. So letting people out of jail is just, it's not an act that accomplishes much at all. I'm sorry, Greg.
Judge Calabrese, DA Howard kind of neatly points out how hard these jobs are. And you bring some, in my experience, some unique gifts to the table of empathy and humility. And I'm kind of curious to hear you talk about, can any judge do this kind of work, both be judge and participant in community outreach?
Well, I'll tell you a couple things. One, my first answer is absolutely not, because there are some judges, if you look how judges go up in their career, they usually do the smaller crimes, misdemeanors, work to the more serious crimes, and their goal is to hear, the murders, the robberies, the more serious cases. There are many judges who don't feel that being out in the community is part of the job. There are many judges who don't feel that problem solving, trying to identify the problem that brought the offender to court and solve that, is part of the job. And it's kind of amazing that I do get to travel around and I hear the same thing, but at the same time, judges say, our jails don't really do anything, we're tired of seeing the same people. So I talk to them about problem solving, and they'll say things like, well, that's really social work. And then the answer back to them is, these are social problems. And if you don't want to address them using the power of the court, you don't have, as a judge, you don't have to decide, who needs detox, who needs rehab, who can do outpatient, how often a person has to see mental health or a combination of both, mental health counselor. You don't have to decide that, but you can get experts that can decide that. And those experts can advise you and you can use the power of the court to solve the underlying problem that brought the offender to court. And maybe I'm getting a little cranky in my old age, Greg, but I'm starting to say, and if you don't want to do that, you're really saying you don't want to do the best job you can do as a judge. And that's pretty much where that goes to and where that leads to. Because problem solving and trying to get to that underlying problem is the only way to handle these cases. Thanks.
So I'd like
not every judge is ready to.
So I want to ask just two more questions before we throw it open to the audience, and I'd like each of you to address these questions. So the first one, Judge Calabrese, you referenced your old age. You're not that old, but you all have been doing this work for quite some time. And I wonder whether each of you guys could talk about the challenge of longevity. Inevitably, when you're doing this work over the course of a decade or longer, that's a lot of community meetings, that's a lot of, stale sandwiches to eat, that's a lot of awkward social moments with irate members of the public. I wonder whether each of you, starting with you, Dawn, could talk about how do you keep it fresh over the years so it doesn't become stale?
Well, I think I've been at the public defender's office almost 22 years, and I think it's just the variety of challenges. Public defense is different today than it was 22 years ago. I can't believe that there are conversations going on right now about bail reform and about legalization of marijuana. I mean, those are things 22 years ago that, as public defenders, we thought were a good idea, but nobody else did. Certainly not people in positions of power who could make those decisions. So it's just, things change, things progress. I think one of the things that's helped me is just changing roles. So starting as a line attorney, and then moving court assignments, doing appellate work for a while, and then the opportunity to serve as the elected public defender really opened me up to something I never anticipated being when I went to law school. I thought I was just going to be a lawyer, and so. A variety of opportunities. I also think that committing to being a lifelong learner and committing to always doing that self-analysis and that reflection and being aware of what's happening outside of your own little world. And that own little world is really like your house and what's happening one block over, or what's happening one county over, or one state over, or one country over. And it's really just being curious and wanting to learn more and grow. So I think for me, those two things, having opportunities to try new things and do different things, but also just being interested in learning.
Judge?
Well, in court, I still get to see the power of the human spirit, which is really just remarkable. How far someone can come back from being knocked so far down. And, we just give them the opportunity. They do the work. They like to thank everybody, but they really should be thanking themselves that they're able to do this. But when you support them and when you give them the right environment and right professional advice from the social workers, it's just amazing how far people can come back. And that kind of keeps you going. And there's stories, when you hear more of the stories, as the case goes on and you hear about their relationships with family, and they, now they rebuild the relationship with the children, and their wife is proud of them, their mother's proud of them. It doesn't get any better than that, because judges want to make a difference. And in these community courts, we can make a difference. And then the other thing that keeps me going, you get my emails. I hope it doesn't sound sappy, but I kind of see us all as cousins, as family, because we share the same values. I love the court builder emails. I absolutely love them. I love seeing that Las Vegas, who was dying for that separate building community court, finally got their court. I love, seeing that I got an email from King County in Seattle talking about a court. Yeah, I love all those emails, because they just keep me going, that we're all part of this together. And being able to exchange ideas and picking up ideas from other courts, I think it's just remarkable, and it keeps it fresh. Those ideas and those courts keep it fresh. So keep those emails coming, please. I appreciate it. I love it.
Sheriff?
So I think I'll frame it with just a very quick personal story. So I told you I was born down south. My parents go up north. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. I'm at my grandfather's knee. From the time I can remember to 13 or 14, we moved north. My grandparents ended up coming with us. My grandfather was a hard worker, but he was in the civil rights movement. He was Birmingham, Alabama, in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. He's telling me all these stories. So I trip into this profession that's the sheriff's office. I'm wearing a uniform. I graduate from the academy. I come home. My mom says what moms say, "Oh, baby, that's so cute." My grandfather, who was living with my grandparents at the time, goes, walks away. At some point, I have this conversation with my grandfather because my dad said I needed to because he can't answer the question. And he says to me, son, how could you do this? So he felt me joining the police was a betrayal of all the work that he had done. He says, don't you remember the stories, the dogs and the marches and all of that? How can you join the enemy? So it took me some time to wrestle with that. But ultimately, the conversation we had before he died was, I honor everything that you did, all the work from the outside. True sustainable change happens from the inside. You got to be sitting at the table. And you have to be courageous enough to challenge status quo. Call out what is wrong. Admit when you're wrong. So what keeps me going is just that. I've been blessed by God to be elected to this position. I do not take that lightly. But there's a responsibility that we have to challenge our system to make it the best that it can be for everyone. And the only other thing I'll add is a leader's role is about change and evolution in the organization. We should always be striving for what's next. And we should be looking outside of ourselves to find out. That's why I'm so honored to be here. So what am I doing at a court? I was asking, I think I asked either Judas or Greg, I said, well, why aren't our court people here? They need to be here. So I want to take some of what I learned and go back to them and sort of challenge them to be a part of this. So I stay motivated and energized because our work's not done. We'll continue to move until things are the way we believe they should be.
Well, I tell you, there are three things. And, you know, I'm a United Methodist, and we always have three things. The first one is grilling. The second one is Publix grocery store. And the third one is conferences just like this. Let me tell you about grilling. When we opened our community prosecutor's office, we decided to seize a drug dealer's house in a neighborhood where they had a long history of problems. And so the day that I went over to this house, I went to the next door neighbor, and at this house there was a man and his wife, and they were both in their 90s, and I asked the woman to explain to me the impact of this crack house next to her. And she talked about the crime, them driving to the house at night, the shooting, the litter in their neighborhood. But when I asked the husband about the impact of the house, he pointed to this Weber grill. And what he told me, he said, Mr. Howard, I have not been able to take it outside and grill on my front porch because of those drug dealers. And he said, I've had it in the house now for about 10 years. And he said, Mr. Howard, I want to grill. So we finally seized the house, and we moved a policeman in the neighborhood, and we had this big ceremony when we had the house decorated, and I went to the neighborhood, and when I walked up, guess what I smelled? Man, he was next door grilling. And what I asked myself is, well, is that what I like to do? Or is it what I really want to do is just put some young guy in jail? And what I figured is that what I really enjoy doing is the grilling. And so I guess I'm just happy to do something that I really enjoy. And I'm hoping maybe that other people can find something in their lives that they really enjoy. The second reason I've been able to sustain this is because of the Publix grocery store in my neighborhood. I still live in the neighborhood, and so we shop at Publix grocery store. And I don't know about your neighborhood, but the people in Publix, if you're doing something wrong, they do not hold back. They just let you have it right in the grocery store, right in front of everybody. But you know, it's a good deal when you can walk in the store and people will actually say, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Howard. They actually will allow you to skip in front of them in line. Well, that says to me, wow, the people in the community really appreciate what we've done, and that allows me to want to stay. The third thing, though, that I think is really important are conferences like this, because I've attended a lot of them, Judge. And what I try to do is I come, and if I see a good idea, I will steal it, I'll take it back to Fulton County, and guess what I'll do? Take full credit for it. And that's why I'm sorry to see Julius leaving, because that means that some of our good ideas will disappear. But that's what I would invite you to do, is to see something worthwhile at this conference, steal it, go back, and take credit for it as your own.
That's a nice invitation. I was actually hoping you were going to invite us all over to grill at your house. All right, last question, real quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. I'd like each of you guys to imagine that the daughter of your best friend has decided to get into your line of work. What advice do you give her? What one piece of advice? And you can choose to answer that question, or you could offer one book recommendation to these fine people here. All right, who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Judge.
No, go ahead.
So I offered, I'm sorry, I can't follow the rules, 2 books. James Baldwin, Go Tell It on the Mountain. Colin Powell, My American Journey. Both come from a root in Harlem, both telling similar type stories, but you look at Powell's, talks about what the outcome of what is possible. So I think those are important. And the only thing I'll add with a daughter is rethink it. But it's a noble profession that does noble things.
Judge Calabrese.
You got that answer wrong. It was supposed to be Start Here. That was Greg's book. Just a quick story is what I would say. So I'm a judge. I'm sitting there, really just started. 2 husband and wife fight. Husband comes through and they have children. Prosecutor asks for $1,500 bail. Wife comes through an hour later. Prosecutor asks for $1,500 bail. And I'm trying to put the 2 cases together. And I say, well, if I did what they wanted to do, what happens to the kids? What happened? So I called up a mentor of mine and I said, you got to give me about 45 minutes of your time. I got a real problem here. I don't understand how this works, et cetera, et cetera. And she said, you don't even have to come see me. You don't need 45 minutes. Your job is to do justice. And that's really the advice that I give other judges sometimes. Your job is to do justice. You're there because they think that you can make a good decision, and that's your job. And then the only thing I would say with regard to a book is the book that inspired me is To Kill a Mockingbird. To me, it's just inspiring. And for young people, it comes in the movie, and the movie is just as good. So there you go.
Dawn?
Wow, there's so many good books to read. This is big or not, but so many good books to read and so much advice to give. I think that what the advice I would give to a young public defender is, no matter how hard things feel like in your shoes as you do this job, it is always harder for what your client is experiencing is always harder than what you are experiencing, and you have to keep that in perspective. You just do. Books, anything by Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me. And a book that taught me a lot was a book called Ghetto Side. And so I recommend that.
D.A. Howard?
Well, I would advise anyone that this is the most honorable job in America, that you should be privileged to work in this area. And it is not something that you should take lightly, but it is something that you should do because you enjoy it, because you've got some reason, some goal. It's certainly not one for financial reward, but it is something that if you really want to make a change. And so I know this is probably an unusual book, but I think that I hear people say this all the time, that, our communities are really falling apart. I don't know what's wrong with our community. So I would ask people to read a book that I go back and read every now and then, and it's a book called Things Fall Apart, and it's by Chinua Achebe. And when you read it, and if you understand the plight of Okonkwo, then you'll see it's very similar to those things that happen in our community. It's called Things Fall Apart.
That happens to be my wife's favorite book. Questions, comments? We have a few minutes here. Do we have a microphone? John, Medina, we do have microphones. Jessica, anybody with a question or a comment, please. Now is the moment. Or do these folks answer everything? Right here. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, we'll get to you, in the back.
Good morning. I enjoyed the presentation and everything, what you're doing with the community, and I was just curious on what are you doing to focus on the mental health? I know that's like one of the big issues as well as substance abuse, but also what are you doing to focus on individuals that are dealing with mental health?
I can, sure. So we have partnership with mental health agencies. I've always said you could justify Red Hook by the number of people we assist with mental health treatment. We also help them with the Medicaid issues and the qualifications. And the one thing that's troubling is that for younger people, the mental health wait is about 6 to 8 weeks. For older people, we can actually get them pretty much on track. But again, it's not me, it's the social workers right on site. But then they come through the court and we can encourage them to take advantage of that and sometimes require it.
If you could just say your name and where you're from, that'd be great.
Good morning, Ronnie Cannon from Cleveland, Ohio. My question is targeted to the sheriff. I'm of the belief that it starts with you as being like the tip of the arrow, so to speak. So my question is, do you guys adopt, say, a philosophy in terms of making referrals to, say, like a community court when it comes to, say, your officer arresting an individual that may have stayed in an abandoned house, and he get familiar with the individual to the point where he's always arrested him once he gets back out, or if it could be like a drug, addict or something of that nature. So do you guys make referrals to the courts?
Great question. We have a pilot program going. It's called CORE. Unfortunately, CORE happens after the fact. We are working right now to put a LEAD type program into Washington County. Very similar. We flew out to Seattle, tried to get some information there. I'll say again, it's a larger picture than just us. So our prosecuting attorney has to agree with that process in terms of, so we'll write a report, refer it to the prosecutor holds it while that person complies. So from a substance use disorder, we're starting that process, and I'll just add on to the young lady with mental health. So we have partnered with our community of mental health now for the last 5 years. We co-wrote and designed a 2-day managing mental health training for first-line officers, not CIT, but something that every police officer should get, regardless of whether they're CIT. And we have given them all the information around resources for deferral. So they do a lot of deferrals now, work hand in hand with our CMH workers. They actually ride along with us at times. So we're trying to move that. And the last thing I'll add in Washington County, we just passed in November a new tax that is a public safety mental health tax that will help us with a lot of the initiatives that we're trying to start in Washington County around mental health, substance use disorder diversion.
James?
Good morning. Thank you so much. What a great group. Everything from the person who's making the arrest to the defense, the prosecutor, and then ultimately the judge. So really nice job. Question. Right now, you probably can think about the 10 or 15 people who are most likely to be the next victim or perpetrator of the crime in your neighborhood. And I'm wondering, how do you go about engaging them? We talk about community engagement at the highest level, the community meetings, and the folks who are asking for more policing or asking for justice. But how do you get to the folks who are most likely to be in front of you or, unfortunately, on the other side of the crime?
Who wants to take that?
So I'll just do real quick. So 2 things. So in Washington County, we don't have the sophisticated database and all that I just heard about in Chicago, where they're doing some of that and reaching out to folks. But what we've done in Washington County is, and there was a question that didn't get asked about our favorite community engagement program. It's called Street Outreach. 10 years ago, we wrote a grant to start hiring ex-offenders. We hire ex-offenders and we make them part of our street outreach team. So to answer your question, those are the people that go back into the community and identify or work with folks that we've identified as not only being the next potential victim, but the next potential perpetrator. And we try to engage them on the front end, and it's not just us, because those ex-offenders have more credibility than we have, and they engage them in conversations and talk to them about potential avenues for them to take. as opposed to what the path that they're going down. So we try to leverage our street outreach. There's enough information that we have working with our community partners where we can identify both communities and individuals that are potential on the receiving end or the giving end of the next crime. We try to engage them up front.
Medina?
Good afternoon. How you doing? My name is Antonio. I'm from Philadelphia. I just have a recommendation for a book. It's called We're All Criminals. It's basically about 1 in 4 people who have a criminal background and 4 in 4 people who have criminal history. So if everyone can, it's by Emily Baxter. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bradley?
Hi. First, I want to say that I was just extraordinarily impressed by the work that everyone on the panel is doing, particularly Mr. Howard with the District Attorney's Office, and also what I'm hearing from the Sheriff. I just have 2 questions, starting with the Sheriff. You talked about changing the culture in the police department and the importance of community policing not just being one part of what the police department's doing. How have you accomplished that? And were there changes made in training? Has training been a big piece of that in terms of changing culture? And I also, for the district attorney, one of the things that you said that really struck me, and something that we don't often pay attention to, is the role of the DA with a lot of the incidents that we've seen with police, and how the cries from the community about making changes. I think the DAs have kind of gotten a pass on this. So how do you shed the light on that? And what is the relation? How do you think the relationship with the DA and the police department have? What kind of impact or influence does it have on them not being more proactive in addressing this?
Well, let me tell you what happened in our county. As you know, the police actually are using dash cams in their cars. I've started to say body cams, but not a lot of the policemen use body cams. But they use dash cams, and so we sometimes get the body cam audio back. And so we've actually received body cams where the policemen are at a dash cam where they're at a scene, and you can hear them saying, I am going to go ahead and arrest this guy because I don't know what that Paul Howard is going to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and arrest him. And they say it in a kind of derogatory sense. But I'm thinking, that's good. Because rather than to shoot him, they've actually started thinking that maybe the DA might prosecute you. So when we heard it, I didn't think much of it until we went to Philadelphia and we met with Commissioner Ross. And Commissioner Ross, who is the commissioner there, this is what he said. He was addressing the then DA in Philadelphia, who was Seth Williams. And what he said was, our policemen do what they think the DA will allow us to do. And that's what he said. That wasn't something that I said. So I believe that is very important. Not that you have to single out the police or punish the police, but what you have to let them know that in a case where there is wrongdoing, and what has been my experience is that the other policemen will come forward and say, hey, something is wrong about this. But it is the DA that is responsible. Let me mention something else. We're here in Alabama and in Birmingham. And as you look at the civil rights movement, what you'll see, again, that almost none of the people who perpetuated violence against demonstrators and people who were simply trying to guarantee their civil rights, they never got prosecuted. And the reason they didn't get prosecuted, it wasn't because of the police, it's because of the prosecutors. And so that's why I think that we have to say, hey, it's not just the policeman, but it's your responsibility as well.
The second part, I'll go back again to just understanding our organizational culture. and understanding that the role that the leadership has in terms of cultivating what the culture is. So one of the first things we did was, again, challenge the basic assumption of what our role is, the impact we can make, the basis for the decisions around who to arrest, who to stop, all of those things, to really challenge it. So if you say, was it just training? No, it's the triangle, right? The administrative triangle. The direction that you give the staff that may come in policy, but also comes in articulation of what the culture is, the values and beliefs. The second one is the training. So if I've changed the expectations for how you are to perform, then I must make sure you have the knowledge, skills, and ability to meet those expectations. So that will come in the form of training. We developed what's called Managing Interpersonal Interaction Series. A day of procedural justice, a day of de-escalation, 2 days of managing mental health crises, a day of understanding bias and achieving cultural competence. So we try to do an analysis of what are some of the basic things we want our staff to understand so they can go out and perform the way we want them to perform. And then the last piece, which we're really just getting to, is developing leadership at all levels of our organization, because that last administrative responsibility is, do you evaluate what your folks do? And how do you address when they're not meeting the expectations? Sometimes it's discipline, sometimes it's coaching. So we're trying to build all of that in. And it just takes time, and that's why I'll go back to continuity of leadership. If the average term for a police chief is 3 to 5 years, do we really expect significant, sustainable organizational change to happen in those agencies when every 3 to 4 to 5 years there's a change in leadership and a change in vision? So we just need to be cognizant of that overall.
We have time for one last question. Medina?
Hi, good morning. My name is Nancy Michaels. I'm with the Restorative Justice Community Court in Chicago. And several of you have mentioned the challenges and the importance of building trust in your communities. And I'm wondering if you can share an example of a seminal moment when you felt that you had achieved that.
Judge?
Well, one thing that happens when you're out at community meetings, not only does the community, and you don't do the once a year for the photo op, you actually have to go, month after month and continually go out there. The community sees that you care, and the police see that you care. So actually, fairly early on, I had an incident where a grandmother her 3 grandchildren had been stopped by the police, and she was a community leader, but it wouldn't have made a difference. She called me up and said, I don't understand this. They didn't arrest them, but my 3 grandchildren got stopped. And why did that happen? And so because I had been out there enough and in the meetings, and because the police chief had seen me enough and knew that I care, I was able to call him up and I said, look, you don't have to answer this question, but I got this call from a community member, and this is what she asked for. And the first thing he said was, I'll get right back to you. He got the 911 call. I read the 911 call. It happened that her 3 grandchildren all had white T-shirts on. There were other things that matched, and they said, look, I'm going to read you the 911 call, and you decide. So I read her the 911 call, and she says, okay, now I know why they were stopped. And then we had another incident where people in our community were getting stopped and frisked, and they called, and I called the captain again. Don't have to answer the question, but, you've seen me out there at the meetings, and he said, I know exactly who you're talking about. Those officers are going to be gone in 2 weeks. So that's kind of an example of building trust with the police, and obviously there's building trust in the community because they just, if you're out there all the time, they just see you out there all the time. I mean, I can't think of one example because at Red Hook there's such a contact between court and community, and that it's pretty much a regular flow going back and forth.
Anybody else want to take a bite at this apple?
It's a difficult situation, and I think you have to take it day by day. I just can't say that there's a moment that you could say I finally won people over. But I can tell you this, there's a street in Atlanta called Campbellton Road. It's a kind of tough place. And so this was at about 12:30 at night. I don't know how many of you all are married, but I was having an argument with my wife, and I decided I was just going to ride and, get a breath of fresh air. And so I Campbellton Road is not far from where I live, so I stopped at a red light, and there was a car next to me. And the person in the car was blowing the horn and honking, and I'm thinking, oh man, what am I doing out here by myself? So I finally decided to let my window down, and there was a woman to my right, and she said, looked at me, and she said, Mr. Howard, what are you doing out here at 12:30 at night? You need to go home. And I guess that's when I thought, well, maybe the people in the community actually do care.
That's a lovely note to end on. It's time for us to go home. Yeah, sure.
I just want to make one other announcement. My community court has been so successful, Greg, that they've stolen my director. And so I'm looking for another candidate. If you'd like to move to Atlanta and become the director of the community court, please see me right afterwards. I'll be over here. Thank you, Greg.
I'm going to be chewing on nuggets from this panel for a long time, but the two that are just going to stay with me most immediately, one is that community engagement is a process, not an event. I think that there's powerful wisdom there. And the second is that cultural change of the kind that these four panelists are trying to achieve takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. So please join me in thanking these four great reformers for their wit and their insight.